Welcome! Thank you for joining us for today's lesson. This is part of a 13-lesson series brought to you by the Food Trust Nutrition Educators. The Food Trust works to ensure that everyone has access to affordable, nutritious food and the information to make healthy choices. In this series, we'll be covering topics such as how to shop at a farmer's market, stretching your food dollars, storing fruits and vegetables, and more. Join us every other week as we share nutrition information from my plate, as well as tips and tricks to eating more healthy food at every meal. Each bi-weekly lesson will be followed by a recipe featuring a seasonal ingredient you can find at your local farmer's market or grocery store. Meet our nutrition educators, who you'll get to know through our lessons or recipe demonstrations. We're excited to have you with us. Thanks again for joining us. Please fill out our anonymous survey at the end of this video so that we can find out more about who we're reaching and how to serve our audience best. We hope you come back for our next lesson. See you then!
Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Ian. I'm a SnapEd nutrition educator with the Food Trust, and I'm very excited to show you this recipe today for Corny Tomato Pasta Salad. It's a very quick, very simple recipe featuring two items that are just coming into season now as I record this, tomatoes and corn. They are in season from about mid-July to mid-October in our area. And let's just go ahead and jump in and get started. Okay, so our first step here is just to, and really the bulk of the work for this recipe is to just go ahead and cut up all of the produce. I'm going to start here with my red onion. Just going to go ahead and dice this up. The recipe calls for about a 1/4 cup of chopped red onion. And so the way I like to cut an onion is to cut off the ends, take off the papery part on the outside, go ahead and cut it right down the middle like this, and set one half off to the side. And then I'm going to go ahead and just cut little slits, but not all the way through, leaving a little bit on the end here, right like that. And then I'm going to cut across the other way. We want these pretty small probably. And you see when you cut across like that, it ends up giving you pretty small pieces already. And that's probably more than enough. Break these up. Maybe kind of give them a quick chop again, just get them a little bit smaller. Shallots are also really nice for salads or, anything raw, because they also have a little bit more of a mild flavor. Alright, now we're going to do some garlic. So this recipe calls for 1 garlic clove. I really like garlic, so I'm going to use more than one, but you can use whatever you like. And if you've ever seen a nice way to get the kind of paper off the outside of the garlic is just give it a little hit with the knife like that, the side of the knife, just be careful, and the paper will mostly just peel right off. And I like to cut this little kind of harder nub off of the end. Just feel like that usually. You don't want to crunch down one of those. Some people leave them in, which is also fine. It's not going to hurt you. And then I'm just going to kind of dice this up. can also use a garlic press, or you can grate garlic. I think with this recipe, I think it's nice to have some small pieces in there. And give that another little chop, just to get them nice and small, so they blend in well with everything. We're gonna go ahead and put them right in our bowl. All right, next thing we're gonna do is go ahead and cut up our tomatoes. I'm using these beautiful little kind of multicolored cherry tomatoes here. Recipe calls for 2 pints, so that's what I have. This looks like kind of a lot. So, you know, with any recipe, you can kind of, you know, play with the amounts to whatever your preference is. You know, I think the important thing with any recipe is to make sure it's something that you're going to enjoy. So, you know, if you're not as big of a fan of tomatoes, maybe use a little bit less. If you really like tomatoes, you can use a little bit more. It says, the recipe says to cut these in half. Some of them, you know, that looks pretty good. Some of these are bigger. And maybe I'll quarter them. See, this is a big guy right here. Let's go ahead and maybe cut that into quarters. You can always get creative when you're cooking. It's nice to use a recipe as kind of a jump off. But you can always make little tweaks here and there. Now I'm using, I guess they call this a chef's knife. I'm using a kitchen knife like this. We always say a sharp knife is a safe knife. You want to make sure that the knife we're using is sharp because it helps make sure that you kind of cut very cleanly through what you're cutting, and it makes it less likely that you're going to kind of get caught and slip and potentially cut yourself. So you always want to make sure that you're using a sharp knife. One thing about tomatoes I wanted to mention is that the best way to store tomatoes is actually at room temperature. You don't want to store your tomatoes in the refrigerator because the tomatoes will actually continue to ripen and kind of develop flavor if you leave them out. And sometimes with tomatoes too, if you put them in the refrigerator, they get too cold. They can get a little bit more of a kind of mealy texture that it's not going to be as enjoyable. But tomatoes are a really great source of vitamin C, vitamin E. They're rich in antioxidants. And these are nutrients that are especially good for your heart. Okay, so moving right along, we've got our red onion, our tomato, and garlic chopped up. I'm going to go ahead and work on the corn now. So I got this corn at the grocery store, still in the husks. I'm going to go ahead and peel these pieces off here. You can use any kind of corn, although as I mentioned at the beginning, it is corn season now, so you can look for corn at your local farmer's market. Just trying to get all the little stringy pieces, the silks they call them, get them all off. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and use my knife to cut the corn right off the cob so we can mix it. You just want to take your knife, just go right down along the edge. Might fly everywhere a little bit, that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and peel the husk off of this corn. Recipe calls for 3 to 4 ears of corn, or 2 cups of kernels if you're using canned corn, or if you're using corn that's already off the cob. I'm actually going to go ahead, so I don't make a mess like I did before. I'm just going to put the ear of corn right in the bowl and kind of slice it down right there. So it just goes right in. There we go. It's a little less messy. Nice. Okay. Okay, so moving right along, we're going to go ahead and chop up our basil. So basil is a really nice herb. Goes really well with tomatoes, goes well with a lot of things. I've got some fresh basil here that I bought at the grocery store. This recipe calls for a half a cup of chopped basil. You can also use 1 tablespoon of dried basil. But this is a really nice herb. You can usually get it at the grocery store with the roots still attached. So it's kind of like buying the full plant. You can even keep it in water at home, and as you peel the leaves off or pick the leaves off, if you take care of it, it'll actually grow more leaves back that you can keep using. It's also a pretty easy herb to grow in a little pot. Basil is a really nice herb. I'm going to go ahead and I picked all the leaves off here. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of pile them on top of each other. It's an easy way that I like to chop them up. There we go. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of slice it down the middle, and then just kind of cut like this into smaller pieces. When you're cutting things like this with a sharp knife, it's always good to kind of curl your fingers back a little bit. I don't have the best technique with it. You can do whatever's comfortable, but it can help you from cutting yourself if you keep your knuckles curled back a little bit. And you should use whatever kind of knife you're comfortable with. I like using this kind of knife, but some people like to use a smaller knife or a serrated knife, type of knife with ridges on the edge. It's whatever you're comfortable with. So that looks like about a half a cup. Again, it's whatever you think looks good. And I'm just going to go ahead and add that to our bowl. So we've got our tomatoes, our corn, red onion, garlic, basil. Look at that. It's beautiful. A lot of color. Of course, I've made sure to wash my hands before starting. Always want to wash our hands before we cook. And now we are going to squeeze some lemon juice. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and get our lemon juice. This recipe calls for, you can actually use lemon juice or vinegar, whatever you prefer. I'm using lemon juice today, 1 tablespoon. So we're going to go ahead and just quarter this lemon, cut it up in half once, and then cut each half in half again. And you can kind of just squeeze this juice out with your hands, or you can, if you have one of these lemon juicers, lemon presses. I like to use these because then you don't have to worry about the seed. It'll filter out the seeds for you. But just make sure, because there are seeds in here. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of press that and just pour that right in. So this calls for a tablespoon. I think that's probably a little bit, probably 1 lemon gives you a little bit more than a tablespoon. Depends on the size of the lemon. I'm going to go ahead and just going to use the whole lemon because that'll give us some nice bright flavor in there to kind of wake everything up. And if you end up using vinegar, you can use any kind of vinegar. So you can use white vinegar, you can use apple cider vinegar if you want to give it a little bit of additional flavor. You could use rice wine vinegar, whatever you have around the house is just going to give it some nice kind of bright flavor to balance everything. Okay, and lastly, we're just going to add to our bowl our kosher salt and olive oil. So I am going to go ahead and measure out the salt because we always want to watch our salt intake, our sodium intake. So this calls for a half a teaspoon. So I have a half a teaspoon, little measuring spoon here. I'm going to go ahead and measure that out. Just going to add that into the bowl. And then we have olive oil. This calls for 2 tablespoons. So I have a half tablespoon here. So we're going to do 4 of these. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, great. Mix that up a little bit. And now while I've been cutting all of these ingredients up, I've also been heating up a pot of water on the stove, getting it ready to cook my pasta. let's take a look over there. Okay, so our water is boiling, so we're ready to dump in our pasta. This recipe calls for a half a pound of whole wheat pasta. I'm going to use brown rice pasta today. That's what we use in my house. Brown rice pasta, also a whole grain, so it's a nice way to get some whole grains in your diet. And we're going to go ahead and dump this in. This is a 16-ounce bag, so that's a full pound. So this is about half a bag, so I'm just going to go ahead and dump that in. Stir. And as you can see, I added a little bit of olive oil to the pasta water. That just really helps to make sure that your pasta doesn't stick together when you drain it. It doesn't really add any extra fat, and I'm actually going to kind of shock and rinse off this pasta anyway once it's done cooking. Okay, so I have my finished pasta here. I've drained it, and I actually went ahead and shocked it with cold water, which means, I basically just, when it was done, when I drained it, I poured cold water all over it and drained it again. That's to, one, stop the pasta from cooking. I felt like it was done, and pasta actually continues to cook after you drain it if it's still hot. But I also did that because I wanted to speed up the process a little bit of cooling the pasta, because when you mix all of these ingredients, all of our vegetables, all of our produce together with the pasta, you want the pasta to be cooled down to, about room temperature. And the idea also with this mixture, with our tomatoes and corn and everything else over here, you want to let that sit ideally for about 30 minutes with the olive oil and the lemon juice or vinegar with the salt to kind of let all those flavors marry together. But then once you have your pasta all ready and the rest of your ingredients all ready, you're basically just going to combine them. So we're going to do that right now. And we're just going to mix it right up. This dish can really be great by itself or as a side dish. This is a lot, so this could be a side dish for a lot of people, obviously. But and you can also use this vegetable mixture with something else. You could put this over rice. You don't just have to serve it with pasta. And again, you can use any type of pasta. You want to just, follow the instructions on the bag for how long it should cook, because different types of pasta need to cook for different amounts of time. But I also really suggest tasting it as it's cooking, because some people like it a little more well done, a little softer, and some people like it a little harder or more al dente. So here we go, and that's basically all mixed together. Okay, and there you have it. I've gone ahead and plated this up in a nice little bowl here. You can even get a little fancy if you want. I'm going to put a little basil garnish on there. And there you have it. Corny Tomato Pasta Salad. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope you try this recipe at home, and we hope to see you back for the next recipe demo, which will be uploaded very soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.